Good morning. Good morning, everyone, and we will now start the event. A very warm welcome to you all at this event organized by Republikon Intézet and the European Liberal Fórum with the title, The Political Relevance of the Migration Issue at the 2017 Czech, Dutch, and German elections. We have a shorter title, of course, so that we don't confuse you with too long titles, but this is actually the title of the book, or booklet, more to say, or publication that we are presenting today. My name is Csaba Tóth, and I am director of Republikon Intézet. I am also member of the board of the European Liberal Forum, so in the name of the European Liberal Forum, I also would like to welcome you all. This event is being streamed live via the European Liberal Forum website, so all our friends throughout Europe, not just the liberal community, of course, but the entire European community will be able to watch this. As those of our Hungarian guests will understand, unlike yesterday at a very major event in Budapest featuring Steve Bannon, where unfortunately the organizers failed as our government friends to purchase sufficient logos and other stuff, so their streaming service was interrupted. Yesterday, this streaming service will not be interrupted, even though, of course, our resources are not comparable to those of our friends at the Hungarian government. This is just, of course, a side joke to them. I have two tasks in the very beginning. I do want to talk one sentence, or maybe one or two sentences about the European Liberal Forum. For those of you who are not familiar with this institution, the European Liberal Forum is the official party foundation, European party political foundations, so to speak, affiliated with the ALDE party, that is, of course, the Liberal Party in the European Parliament. As you know, there are political foundations existing on the European level. Some of them are more centralized. The European Liberal Forum is a decentralized political foundation. That means that we have members which are very strongly connected to certain political parties. And we also have members like my own Republikon Intézet, who's not connected to one specific political party, but rather to liberalism in general. We work in a decentralized way. And we are present in almost all of the European countries. What we do today is we will be presenting a booklet, a publication that we had the opportunity to create with some of our friends who will be featured here today. The booklet is about the migration issue and how it impacted political campaigns. It is, of course, a very hot topic today in Hungary, not necessarily because of the number of migrants we have in Hungary, but rather because of the political dimensions of the whole issue. As I will be talking about it a bit later, the 2018 elections in Hungary were very much dominated, at least on the government side, by this issue. So we thought, even back then when we started this project, to see how this campaign plays out in different contexts. The Hungarian audience can hear a lot about this issue. We do have a lot of information. Some people claim that Viktor Orbán's message is basically now the European narrative, that even in Czech or Dutch or German elections, everybody is basically saying what Viktor Orbán is saying. Other interpretations of these elections, again, domestic interpretations, would contest those views. So we thought it would be a good idea to ask experts or professionals from those countries to tell us how this issue played out in their respective elections. So this is what we will be doing today. We will look at 3 specific country cases from the Czech Republic, Germany, the Netherlands. All of them recently had elections, and we have an expert from each of them. Not all our experts are liberals. Some are ELF members, some are not, but they all have a grasp on the topic. And we also asked Eszter Sós-Petronella to moderate this discussion. In addition to being a wonderful moderator, she's an expert on the French political scene and French domestic politics. So in her questions, I specifically asked her to give some information as well, so that we can ideally cover one more country, where unfortunately we now do have a European Liberal Forum member, but we have less cooperation with that. But before we start all this, and before I will give the room to Eszter to introduce Sol, we are very happy to have here Péter Balázs, who is, of course, former foreign minister, former commissioner, and director of a Center for Neighborhood Studies here in Budapest, affiliated with the Central European University, to give an overview, an opening speech or a welcome speech on this issue, to give us some introductory thoughts, some food for thought, and maybe some room for discussion and to debate that we'll be able to structure. So without further ado, I will ask Péter Balázs, again thanking him for being here, not for the first time and not for the last, definitely, to talk about this issue. And in the meantime, or maybe in the break, you can all have one of these later on. You can find them on the table. Péter, the floor is yours. Thank you.
Thank you, Csaba. Ladies and gentlemen, first of all, let me congratulate Republikon for this wonderful initiative. I think it's a valuable contribution to the topic to have this comparative picture about 3 very different countries in this process. Let me start with the first half of the title, The Relevance of the Migration Issue, and then to come to political effects afterwards. Human species is migrating around the globe. It has always been a phenomenon. In recent times, some push effects have increased, wars, crises, in some areas natural catastrophes, and there are very strong pull effects, the attraction of welfare zones like the United States, Europe, Australia. It is well known that the United Nations has accepted 2 years ago the famous New York Declaration at the General Assembly, which is a very deep, detailed program with 90 points. And negotiations started this year about what they call a global compact about migration. Hungary was one of the very few countries which refused taking part in that process, which is about safe, orderly, and regular migration. So those who do not like to be part of that obviously refuse a world order for a safe, orderly, and regular migration. Everybody knows that the United Nations cannot adapt compulsory rules or provisions, but some suggestions. I have mentioned 3 welfare zones. 2 of them are bluntly refusing receiving migrants. It is well known that in Australia they push back anybody and they transport them to very specific islands. United States, I don't like to quote the expressions used by the president, but he is believing in the efficiency of a wall on the Mexican border. Europe is very attractive in an area of Asia and Africa, maybe not further. Why? Because we have high living standards here. many of those people have historical ties and also cultural attachment to Europe. Some of them know the languages of European countries. It is well known that Europe is open and has manifested a humanitarian attitude to asylum seekers. And the vast big area of the Schengen zone, consisting of 26 countries, opens the way for internal free movement for those who have once reached that zone. At the same time, migrants could have experienced that in this big zone of Schengen, there are rather different national attitudes concerning migration. There is no common migration policy. And once they are accepted and they can stay in Europe, they also experience the rather important cultural gap between their cultures, their habits, and European norms. Integration is not easy in that area. So Europe is by far not the promised land for those migrants, but is still very attractive. The common denominator of the three case studies is obviously EU membership. All the three are EU members, so what I try to do in a limited time frame is to highlight some European aspects of the problem in 3 points. First, to add a few observations about the 2015 migration crisis. Second, to comment extreme right reactions to that event. And third, to look for some solutions of some problems. Let's start with the 2015 crisis. We have seen several times this definition that it was a big external and asymmetrical shock on the EU. However, it was not unexpected. We could see the emergence of refugee flows. If you open the 2003 Saloniki EU Summit presidency conclusions, you can already see a call, mainly from Greece and some entry countries, for immediate action because the number of refugees is growing. Just look back, 2003, June, there was an emergency situation on some border places. However, the majority of the EU member states did not pay due attention to that call. Then we have learned that those people who come to Europe are not primary migrants, because primary migrants go to the first safe country, usually to the neighboring country. This is a secondary flow of migrants, mixed nationalities, mixed motivations. People are passing across several states and borders, and in addition, they tend to further migrating within the EU. So they make a very long journey outside the EU before arriving to an EU external border, and then they go on migrating. This is a two-phase migration phenomenon. Why asymmetric? Because there are very important differences between the burden on countries of the first entry, transit countries, final destination countries, and several countries are not involved at all in this process. In 2015, we could see the importance of the Balkan route. First entry was Greece, then some non-EU countries in between on the Western Balkans, then a second entry, first to Hungary, then later on to Croatia, an internal migration from those entry countries up to Sweden, Germany, and a few other countries. But if we count together all those countries which were concerned, this was maybe 1/4 of the total number of EU member states. And all others, like the Baltics, like Ireland, like Portugal, many others, were not concerned at all. And this asymmetry is at the origin of ambiguous reactions or shifting the responsibility to a few countries. We have to face a very big problem of identifying individuals, nationalities, and motivations in this highly mixed crowd of people. Schengen failed in this respect. In practical terms, the Schengen system and also the Dublin system collapsed under the weight of the 2015 crisis. No country could really assure the conditions for a humanitarian reception of people in need. Food, shelter, medical care. This was the first problem. It didn't work. It didn't work in Greece, it didn't work in Hungary. It started to work in Germany to some extent and also in Sweden after some time. We were not prepared for that. Second problem, our system totally collapsed under the weight of identifying people individually, putting the question, who are you? And in case they lost their documents, some lost on purpose, we know well, in order to get a better treatment in the reception countries, to proceed to an identification with the help of fingerprints, with the help of detailed questions, with the help of identifying their languages and dialects, which revealed in many cases that those who said to be a Syrian were Moroccans and others. A simple language test could identify them by that, but it took time. Then we failed at following the internal movement of people, because according to the Dublin system, the country of the first entry is responsible, but immediately after they went on their way and they emerged in other countries. Some of them tried to touch the welcome money 2, 3, several times, and so on. So using all the opportunities, but we had no idea about their internal movement. Those people were rather friendly as long as they could go on the way, and became angry when they were stopped. We had evidence for that at least 2 times on Hungarian soil. We are still fighting with several problems of returning non-recognized asylum seekers to their home countries, because this is a country-to-country problem. So Germany has to settle the problem with Morocco. Germany has to settle the problem with Afghanistan or any other country. We should do a lot of things, improving border control, reducing the push effects in the countries of origin, fighting against smugglers who use to the maximum this situation, and dealing with external transit countries like Turkey or Libya or others. How did the extreme right react to that problem? Extreme right politicians, populist forces found a fantastic new topic for their argumentation. They put it in the center of political actions, with special regard to elections, totally independently from the relevance of the issue for the country. If we compare the German and the Czech chapter, we find clear evidence to that thesis. Orbán in Hungary has not invented the issue, but got the feeling very early that there is something in the air, not even at the rise of the coming of refugees by the middle of 2015, but much before, at the Charlie Hebdo attack. And then his popularity in Hungary was just falling down, and he could feel the new opportunity that a new enemy is in sight. He rushed to Paris. He pushed himself possibly in the first row of this march. He didn't succeed really, so he was somewhere behind the leaders of EU in the second row. But he immediately launched his campaign, putting together a new enemy of terrorism based on Islam fundamentalism. He could learn from Geert Wilders in the Netherlands, Marine Le Pen in France, and several others, but he went further and is followed by other extreme right politicians. His tricks are rather simple and transparent. He's connecting the obvious cultural background of people coming mainly from states, countries, regions of Islam culture with Islam fundamentalism and terrorism, neglecting the fact that many of those refugees are escaping from Islam fundamentalism, from the Islamic State. He is also neglecting the fact that those who committed terrorist acts in Western Europe are typically second-generation immigrants. It was Charlie Hebdo, Bataclan, the Brussels issues. They can't even use new immigrants who do not know the language, do not know the places, cannot act under very complex circumstances. He has misused the confusion in the EU because of this big external shock. Our systems, the Schengen system, in the Schengen protocol, if you open it, you find a very nice provision, which is a typical good weather provision, that external borders of the Schengen area can be crossed at official crossing points in office hours. Now compare it with what happened then when 10,000 people came per day. And also the Dublin, which is a typical EU reaction, shifting the emphasis, shifting the responsibility to a few countries, first entry. They should settle it. It can work if we have 1 or 2 refugees or asylum seekers per day, but certainly not with that number. And Orban and the company have developed global fears and frustrations into xenophobia. There are, of course, fears from globalization, from many new phenomena, but he could increase that. In addition, he has offered conspiracy theories, including all the actors. This is a constructed conspiracy theory, and normally thinking people would hardly believe it, that elderly gentleman who is coming near to his 90 years, Mr. Soros, is launching a plan dictating conditions to the European institutions, and European institutions are organizing the coming of refugees. So this is total nonsense. However, it worked in Hungary. And the last point is the terminology. This massive propaganda used on purpose various misleading expressions. We have seen from the outset that illegal immigration comes from the United States. Maybe Mr. Finkelstein proposed it to Orban, because this is typically the Mexicans and other Latin Americans coming or trying to come illegally into the United States and with the intention of staying there. This is illegal, the entry is illegal, and the purpose is immigration, staying there. Now, what has happened on our borders was, first of all, not illegal, because those people who submit an asylum request are not illegal anymore. This is one point. Second, that they didn't have, at least in Hungary, the intention of staying in Hungary. They wanted to go on. From the German aspect, of course, it can be considered as an attempt for immigration, for a permanent stay, but certainly not in the transit countries like Hungary. And then there is a total confusion of immigrants, migrants, asylum seekers, refugees, terrorists, criminals, and many others, which are always mixed up and used with political intentions. In Hungary, this mixture of various messages, including a lot of fake news, has been going on not only in the election campaign, but for 3 years. Practically since the Charlie Hebdo attack, it was going on, mixing up government methods and money, of course, with election campaign money. I have seen, for instance, there was a picture taken in 2015 about the mass of refugees crossing Hungary, and that picture, without any comment, just only with one word, stop. Stop, and with small letters there was government information on that picture. Government information. So what was this government information about? The problem, and here I close my second point, is the opposition in Hungary has not found adequate answers to that well-constructed political campaign. Simple refusal or simple contestation does not work. Some populists say that this is an imminent threat, millions of people are waiting on the Serbian border, want to come to Hungary. It is not sufficient to say that it is not true. There should be some, definitely more arguments. Second, the kind of compliance with the EU, which is a highly opportunistic attitude, sharing the views that yes, of course, there's a danger. We should not weaken the protection of Hungary. One of the leaders of the Socialist Party said in the campaign that I wouldn't have any better idea than the fence. It was a very bad message. I was asked immediately after in a TV channel, and I said, I have only better ideas than the fence. Any idea is better than this fence, which is destroying nature, which is hurting not only people but animals, and which has got a lot of investment, a lot of money. The positive attitude, the positive example of some countries, first of all, Germany was not attractive either, because Germany was overloaded. Germany overstretched the patience and the tolerance of people, obviously, with a lot of good intention, but neglecting state duties like identifying the people, not letting them to join the society before they are somehow prepared and educated. Of course, there was no time for that. But the final outcome was not encouraging and helped mostly the populists. And finally, the EU's insistence on some methods, like the compulsory relocation quota, didn't help either, because this is a rather unfortunate idea. And at that point, I come to my last point. What about solutions? Some political problems are rooted in the complex nature of this mixed flow of secondary migrants, putting an asymmetrical burden on the member state. So if you take all these elements together, you can better understand that those people coming from Syria, Afghanistan, and other places, and recently from the depths of Africa, have made a long journey with very high risks, sometimes putting their lives at risk. After such a risky enterprise, they want to conclude that adventure with an optimal solution. So they don't want to stop halfway somewhere on the Hungarian plain, but they want to go to the best possible host country. That's why Germany is under very heavy pressure, and that's why Sweden had to close the borders earlier. They are impatient. They are not waiting for invitations either in refugee camps somewhere in Jordan or Turkey, or in the first entry to the European Union on Greek islands, but they want to go on. And for that reason, they are delivered to the assistance of smugglers to a large extent. For the moment, countries of first entry, first of all Greece and Italy, and countries of the final destination, first of all Germany, are overloaded and ask help and solidarity from other countries. We know that the Council of Ministers of Interior has adopted a decision in September 2015 about relocation quotas at a very, very low level. It was just a test. Let me add that I had the privilege to sit in the European Commission for some time, to be in the Council of Foreign Ministers for some time. This was an early and bad decision. You shouldn't come to either drafting a text or putting up an Excel table of any kind before getting the full political support of the member states. And they jumped that very important phase, saying that, okay, time is pressing, we should adapt it. And formally they adapted. And then we could see the follow-up. Because if they had the time, if they could take time for putting the question that, do we share this very big problem of countries like Greece, Austria, Germany, and others, are we ready to help in one way or another? And waiting until all the member states say yes. And then let's discuss in what way. Maybe some would say that we could accept some relocated people. Some others could say that no, we would like to see some other contributions. But they took this decision and then created at least a double tension, because some countries are not willing to give a positive follow-up to the decision, first of all Hungary, and they are increasing the conflict situation on purpose. But that's what happened in the other Visegrad countries, that we don't want to people. They have heated up public opinion of many people, and in the actual situation, if there were a government change in Hungary tomorrow, sweet dreams, then it would be very difficult to get the approval of people for any change in that attitude. It would take time and a step-by-step convincing of people. So people are now mobilized against any acceptance. At the same time, there is a second conflict line that accepted refugees would not necessarily accept the relocation themselves. They came partly in order to join their families somewhere in Western Europe, partly with dreams and intentions. So if they say that from tomorrow on you are most welcome in Lithuania, they would refuse. And using the free circulation of people within the Schengen zone, they would change their place. So it is certainly not a very good solution, and it is only increasing the problem. Problems usually in government actions require solutions at the same level and in the same dimensions where they occur. Migration is a worldwide issue. For us, it is at least an EU-level problem. We should immediately modernize the whole Schengen system, equip it with all necessary devices in order to receive people entering that zone and following their internal routes, and Dublin. Hungary has come up with another obstruction, saying that it would be better to wait until the election of the new European Parliament before handling this Dublin problem. This is quite simply shifting it into the future. Relocation quotas with sanctions should be replaced by positive incentives. Instead of punishing non-compliant countries, those countries should be rewarded, which are open and helped. There is a hope now in the draft European long-term budget, which has almost tripled money for refugee issues, border control, reception of migrants, and so on. So it could offer a help in that issue. Root causes should be handled in the countries of origin. Hungary was the country which torpedoed the EU-Africa agreement in the last minute. UN global agreement should be promoted, and Hungary as an external border country, partly of the whole EU with Ukraine and Serbia, partly of the Schengen zone, with Romania for instance, should be prepared for handling future waves of migrants, because 2015 was certainly not the last. Nobody knows what would be the outcome of the new emerging tensions around Iran, the Middle East problem. So anytime migrants can start. Now, good weather, summer is coming, there is always, every year, some increase. Mr. Orbán could sell that fence to the public as if Hungary were protected for any future danger. You know, that fence is only on the Serbian border. So Hungary's border with Serbia, which is 176 kilometers long. And that 176 kilometers is only 8% of the total more than 2,200 land borders of Hungary. So if you have a piece of land and you make a fence on 8%, there's hardly more than a big gate, and there is no fence all around. So any new migration wave could get easily around that short piece of fence. This doesn't solve anything. We should prepare and build up capacities for the humanitarian reception of any people entering the Hungarian soil, and asking also the help of civil organizations who could do a lot in that issue. We should build up the first identification capacities, learning from the German experience, fingerprint readers, questionnaires, language tests, and many others. And then come three big chapters: the further treatment of people, handling asylum requests in an overall EU procedure, following, if necessary, the internal movement of people who have once asked, not shifting everything. So this is the Dublin. Assuring safe transit to other member states if it has been legalized, and proceeding to the return of non-recognized refugees. anti-EU, anti-EU speaking, anti-Soros billboards, national consultations in the way as Fidesz did it, or any fence will not protect the country. We shall be prepared with a very close European cooperation for any new events in order not to repeat what happened in 2015. Let me wish you a fruitful conference. I am really sorry because I have to host another conference at Central European University now, but I will be informed later on about the outcome of your discussions. Thank you for this.
So my name is Esther Sós. Hello again to everyone. As Csaba indicated, I will be moderating this event today. I'm not going to talk much, but as promised, I'm going to bring up the French standpoint whenever possible. That's not the time and place to do that. However, we are going to do the second presentation, which is going to be the presentation of Ms. Marta Hesselmans from the Netherlands. She's a senior researcher of the Mr. Hans von Mierlo Stichting. The topic is the Dutch election of 2017. The title is How Populism Lost and Won. The floor is yours.
Thank you, Esther. I hope I'm audible this way. Yeah? Okay, perfect. Thank you, Esther, and thank you, Csaba, for inviting me. I'm very happy to be here and to talk about this very crucial topic that I think occupies our minds today, yesterday, and will do tomorrow. It's really something that's not going to go away anytime soon, so let's talk about it. So, very briefly about me and the Familio Foundation. So, the Familio Foundation is a political think tank that is aligned with the Dutch party called D66, Democrats 66. And in the Netherlands, that is a progressive liberal party, and that is currently part of the coalition government. I will tell you more about Dutch political landscape, but that's just to have the setting. And within the Familio Foundation, as a think tank, we talk a lot about the issue of migration. We've actually been working on a vision paper on progressive liberal vision on the topic of migration, asylum, but also on integration, the next step once people are settling into our country. How do we make sure that they can also become part of the country? And what dilemmas does that come up? So, topic that we like to talk about a lot. So today, what I want to do is talk about the topic of migration in the Dutch elections of 2017. Now, as you might recall, 2017, that was the year of all these elections in Europe where everybody thought the populists are taking over. The Netherlands, Germany, France. And the Netherlands was first. And there was a huge fear that our very own populist party, actually I'm a little critical of calling it that way, but that's another discussion. We're talking about Geert Wilders and his Party for the Freedom, that they would win. They didn't. They did not become the biggest party. They did become the second biggest party. The second biggest party in the Netherlands. That is huge, and I will show you how big that is when I look at the political landscape. Now, how did Geert Wilders win? Or rather, with what topic did he win? What was his big topic? Migration, exactly, yeah, so we are awake. So, Geert Wilders' party program was one page. It started with this quote: "Zero asylum seekers and no more immigrants from Islamic countries, borders closed." That was basically Geert Wilders' program. And although, again, he didn't become the biggest, he became very big. The topic of migration became very big in these elections. And I want to talk about how did it become so big, and most of all, what did the different political parties do with this topic? How, and what was their approaches, and what worked, what didn't work? Who, in the end, won the elections? So quickly, let's talk about the Dutch political landscape. Now, this could be this could be the whole conference. I will not do that. In the Dutch 2017 elections, as many as 13 parties participated. That is huge. That means that we have a very fragmented political landscape, very divided on the social economic axis of left versus right, but also divided on the more cultural axis of conservative versus progressive. Conservative also on maintaining national identity, resisting change, and progressive on more embracing change and also embracing the new diverse multicultural society. So these are some of the major parties, and I just put up very broadly where they are on the spectrum. This could be a debate in itself, but broadly speaking, we have two major left parties, the Labour and the Socialist, and here these are traditional left parties, and especially Labour has been losing significantly in the past couple of years in the Netherlands. Used to be a major party, major government party, now it's a small opposition party. Then we have the Christian Democrats, also traditionally a big party in the Netherlands, on the conservative side. Has diminished, it's slowly coming up again, but is somewhere in between. Has become a bit of a middle-sized party. The VVD is an interesting one. That is, we call it a conservative liberal party. Again, this could be up for discussion. They are now the biggest party and they've been the biggest party since 2010. So they are kind of the ruling party at the moment. This is Mark Rutte, our prime minister. He's from this party. VVD is also a member of ELF. Then we have D66, my party, Democrats, progressive liberal, party that is slowly growing, has had lots of ups and downs, and in a way is close to the VVD on terms of liberal economics, but also close to the Greens in terms of very strong focus on sustainability and also on embracing the changing society and also diversity and migration as part of that. Then we have the Greens. They are growing right now in the Netherlands, becoming a bigger party. They had a very strong leader, very, very idealistic, were really able to mobilize a lot of people, also on issues of humanity, of diversity. And then we have the PVV, which I put last, but is definitely not least, because again, they are the second biggest party. Geert Wilders' Party for the Freedom. I put it here as populist right, but they are kind of all over the place because they have left economic policies and then they have right nationalist policies, so sounds familiar probably. So, briefly the landscape. Now let's talk about the issue of migration in the Netherlands. New? Absolutely not, especially when we look at the issue of asylum migration. This has been a topic of debate for decades. We had, of course, a big rush of asylum migrants coming to the Netherlands in the 1990s with the breakdown of the Yugoslav Republic. And then again, of course, in 2015. And it was pretty big for the Netherlands. Focus is always, the eyes are always on Germany and Sweden, true, but don't forget the Netherlands. We also had a lot of immigrants coming to our fantastic welfare state. So that was not very new, but what was new was this. The debate was intense, hectic, dramatic. It was the most divisive debate about asylum and migration, and I'm not on purpose putting these things together because they were completely mixed up, that we've ever had in the Netherlands. These are just some examples of headlines of 2015. Europe closing its borders, despair in Calais, Fort Europe is breaking down. Who is giving them shelter? Drama, drama, lots of drama. Now, how did the political parties respond to all this? 2017 were the first big parliamentary elections after the year 2015. So in a way, it was bound to become a topic, migration, and the different political parties had definitely prepared for that to a certain extent. In all the political programs, there was at least some mentioning of migration, but not that much. Especially if you look at the parties on the left, they had maybe a paragraph. D66 actually had perhaps most about migration. Well, apart from Geert Wilders, of course. So that was interesting that throughout the election campaign, migration as a topic became bigger and bigger. And what started out as a discussion about mostly asylum migration, indeed, what do we do with the next wave of refugees from Syria or from other countries in the Middle Evolved into this whole debate about migration in general, about the supposed failure of integration of our Turkish and Moroccan labor migrants of the 1960s. It became about national identity, about values, about culture, and everything was mixed together in these debates. I put it out there because it's one of the way that the framing was done throughout these election campaigns. The term testosterone bombs. This was really Geert Wilders basically lumping all refugees, all migrants together as these are potentially very dangerous men who are going to harm our women and children. So just to give you a sense of how these debates hardened. Now we roughly could see 3 approaches to dealing with this topic. The populist approach I already talked about a bit. This was not only represented by Geert Wilders though. We actually have a new right populist party emerging now. It's called Forum for Democracy. They only just came on the scene in 2017, but they're growing quickly and they have a more intellectual discourse, but it comes down to very much the same thing: stop immigration, close the borders, close the asylum centers, and really protect Dutch national interest, culture, security. Then on the opposite, there is the progressive approach to migration that you could see among the progressive parties, particularly the Greens, but also D66. They had quite a different story, and they said, well, we need to focus much more on regulating immigration. And the best way to do that is in collaboration with other European member states. And this way we can welcome refugees, we can be humanitarian, and at the same time be realistic that we can't welcome everybody. We have to do this together. That was, in a nutshell, the approach from the progressive side. Much more focused on humanity instead of security. Then we have the approach from both the left and the conservative parties, the Christian Democrats and the VVD. This is now it gets really interesting, I think, is that they both, very different parties, said that we are representing the middle way on the topic of migration. So we are neither populist, right, closing the borders, nor are we progressive, welcoming refugees. They actually just immediately labeled progressive as only welcoming refugees and skipped talking about how the progressive also want to regulate migration. They just said progressive is welcoming refugees, populist is stopping all refugees, and we, the left and the conservatives, are in the middle. We want to limit migration, secure the borders, and still help refugees. There's some humanitarianism there, but mostly in the region. So the Turkey deal. The Turkey deal actually came basically from our Labour Party. They were the ones who first came up with the idea of making a deal with Turkey, that Turkey would receive the refugees and from Greece, and then maybe send a few back to Europe, and then that didn't work out in the end. But anyway. Yes. Sorry, I'm not sure if I'm allowed to say the word here, but yeah. So this is obviously a critique on the approach of Labour. So it says refugee ? Fuck off to Turkey, and then skip the last sentence. That's a different discussion. So this was a critique on that Labour policy, saying like, well, let's just put all these refugees in Turkey, and that's exactly what gets so interesting. Why this approach worked very well for the conservatives, but not for the left. So if we look at who won these elections, what you can see, I hope you can see it, the VVD, the conservative, they became absolutely the biggest, although it should be mentioned that they did not become as big as they had hoped to be. They actually lost a lot of seats compared to the previous elections, but they still became the biggest party. Then the PVV, the second biggest, and then you can see that the Christian Democrats and also the progressive parties, they all won. The Christian Democrats came out pretty big, but they actually lost compared to previous elections. The progressive parties definitely won compared to previous elections. So just to give you an idea. And the left diminished, especially Labour. I mean, that's like the worst result they've ever had, ever, in their entire history. Yeah, exactly. Oh, sorry, yeah, these are seats in the parliament. Thank you. I should have clarified that. So briefly, an analysis of what happened here. Again, something we could talk about for the entire day. So in a nutshell, what worked, what didn't work in this whole election campaign? So for conservatives that took this kind of middle way, that worked well for them. And why did it work well? Partly because they tap into the electorate of the PVV. So you could say that the voters for the PVV are more likely to, if they don't vote for Wilders, that they are more likely to vote for the VVD than for Labour. That's one explanation. But I think what is more interesting, what the conservatives very successfully did, is that they labeled Geert Wilders and the populists as radical and naive. And especially that was interesting. They basically said, closing the borders, yeah, perhaps we like that too, but it's not going to work. And Geert Wilders, by the way, you're never going to be in the government anyway. We're going to shut you out. And that was a tough discussion, but I think it worked, especially because Geert Wilders made the big mistake of being absent in most of the debates. He didn't go to the major television debates. He said, I'm not going to talk with you. So what happened was that very few people knew what he actually wanted. They only heard, oh, he's going to close the borders, but then what? And they heard from the VVD and the Christian Democrats, well, we actually have a better story here, and you guys, you don't have a chance to rule anyway. So that was quite successful for the conservatives. But this whole approach of we are the middle way, that did not work for the left. The left were way too vague on this, and especially ambiguous, because they tried to say, well, we are strict on refugees. We're going to, say that refugees should mostly be received in the region. But at the same time, we embrace this diverse society, and people got mixed up. It was not clear where the left really stood, and most of all, the left just didn't really talk very much about migration. It was too sensitive. They avoided the topic. What did work for the progressives, they talked quite a bit about migration, and they were consistent. They had a consistent focus on humanity. They had very clear ideals, and that was, I think, successful. At least for the electorate, for the progressive parties, they really appreciated that they were consistent in saying, refugees, when they are real refugees, we have to help them, and we have a responsibility here. So, the final question, who really won these elections? Back to Wilders. No, he did not win. He only became the second biggest party. Yes, he won. He became the second biggest party. Again, I think we shouldn't underestimate how big that is. And most of all, Geert Wilders won with the topic of migration. And for all the talk about how the different parties approached that topic and responded to him, I think altogether they made his topic a very big topic. And I think all the political parties should take responsibility here, that they all helped reinforce Wilders' discourse on migration to make it not only very big but also very divisive topic. All parties contributed to mixing migration with refugees, with national identity, with values, to make it into such a complex story that the Dutch electorate almost said, we don't even want to talk about this anymore. This is not getting us anywhere. And also we saw that after the elections, it still wasn't over. The negotiations to form a coalition government broke down on the topic of migration. In the end, a coalition was formed after months of talking, and now we have some story about migration, but we're still far from an actual clear statement, partly because of the huge divisiveness that the parties all created together. So, sorry, that's not a very positive story, but I think it's important to be realistic about what is happening. That's my story for today. Please feel free to contact me. There is an English summary of the vision paper that we've written, and I will be most happy to share it. So just send me an email, and I will be happy to send it. Thank you.
Thank you, Marta, for this really concise presentation. Let's skip to another big and important country of the European Union. I dare say one of the most important countries when it comes to the European migration issues, Germany. The title is Exploiting the Migration Issue by the Radical Right in Europe's Heartland, the 2017 German elections. They were interesting elections. It was very difficult to form a government. So let's hear Stefan Drexler, a researcher, a PhD student from the Andrássy University, how the migration issues affected the German elections and perhaps how these debates on migration affected these difficulties to form a government.
Yeah, thank you very much, Esther, for this kind introduction. Thank you very much for inviting me to this presentation today. Does it work? Okay. Yeah, you wanted me to speak about exploiting the migration issue by the radical right in Germany. To be very honest, I think this would only be half of the question what really happened here. I mean, the AfD, did the party exploit the issue of migration? For sure they did. I mean, if we look what Mr. Balázs said and also Marta said, you could just delete AfD and write right-wing populist party there. The recept would be the same. So it's not the AfD that attracts voters. It's the topic of migration that attracts voters. And German voters did not have had any opportunity to voice their protest. And that's actually AfD. So where we have to look here, what happens here? It's the election result of Germany. And it says Zweitstimmenergebnis, it's like the secondary vote. It's the vote that in the end decides about the composition of the Bundestag. And what you can see is that the union parties and the SPD who formed the government, they lost dramatically. It's the biggest loss any governing coalition ever suffered in Germany since 1949. And what you can also see that the opposition, it was from 2013 to 17, the left, so it was only here Die Linke and the Green Party, they managed to absorb 1.1%. That's fewer than the Sonstige, the other parties, splinter parties, lost. So there were a lot of votes on the market, and I'd say, sorry, but it's a competition. What happened in Germany that the AfD could really make it to almost 13%? So there was a lot of votes on the market, and it was the other parliamentary opposition, the AfD and the liberals, who managed to absorb those votes. So what did happen in German democracy after 2015 with migration, that this result here was possible. That we have the union parties and the SPD with the weakest results ever. I hope you can see it from the back. It's actually the table, what I found out when doing the research for the book here. You can see here on the left the parties and some categories I tried to come up with. I mean, some things are similar to what Marta said actually. We had the center parties, I would say here it's the CDU, the SPD, but also the left party, with big problems in addressing the topic, saying, actually with this topic we feel very inconvenient. It was Mrs. Merkel being chancellor. Everybody knew that she stood for this welcoming policy. She opened the border in 2015. But we also knew that the electorate of the Conservative Party, the union parties, did not like very much those border opening and thought it overburdens Germany. But she was still chancellor. She wanted to become chancellor for a fourth time now. She did become. But for a party, the topic was very tricky. That was also why the CDU had no clear approach to that. Is migration positive, negative? Somehow yes, somehow no. A very, very unclear party program, very unconcrete, no solutions. Was the question, is migration a threat to the society? The CDU did not really answer to that question. It was somehow yes, it is a threat, somehow no, it's not a threat. It's progress, we should be open to progress, but some way it is a threat. It was very unclear to the people. Let's probably continue with the SPD. It was the same. We are a progressive party. Migration is somehow progressive. It's not negative at all. Yeah? A threat, of course, it's not a threat. Concrete, no. We don't want to give concrete solutions to the problem. We don't have probably solutions to the problem. The left here was very interesting. Not a good topic for them. if it comes to topic, positive. Yeah, migration is something good. Let's open the borders, a bit utopism behind that. But Mrs. Wagenknecht, she's the leader of the left party, and in Germany she's very popular. She's a very intelligent person, sometimes looks a bit strict. She's quite close to communism, but people like her. She's intellectual, and she's the most prominent figure the left has, and she represents the east of Germany, the party in the east of Germany. And she spoke out very, very aggressive against migrants, saying the migrants actually do steal our social benefits. We cannot afford, if we want to govern, that everybody who comes to Germany gets the same social security standards. It's not possible. So the left here was divided. The majority of the left, of course, did not see it as a threat. They said, okay, it's not a real threat. They were concrete, but in a way, I'd say it was utopistic. They just tried to improve everything. If they wanted more public transport for Germans, of course, also migrants should profit for that. If they wanted more public housing, of course, it should also be available for migrants. So there were concrete approaches in the topic, but they did never say how they want to finance it, how they want to do it in a way. Now let's come to the Greens and the AfD, because those parties mirror each other. The Greens and the AfD, of course, saw it as a good topic to deal with that, because for the Greens, super positive. Migration, very good. There were quotes like, migrants are gifts for us, we should be very open for them, they're more worth than gold, they will save our economy. And people of the Greens, the Green core electorate, wanted to hear that. And for the Greens, it was a good strategy to really be open, be positive towards migrants. I mean, the AfD, also, it was a winning topic for them. Of course, here, nothing positive, everything negative, a threat, of course, and some are concrete. Yeah? Let's come to the liberals, the FDP here. Very interesting. For them, it was a topic that was very good for them, because they saw, as I said, there is a lot of space. We can, right off the union parties, win a lot of voters. So what they did was a bit positive, migration is good for the economy. Negative, it might be too much for Germany. We need to bring order into migration, into the issue. We need to stop what happens at the moment. 2015 was chaos, and liberal voters do not want chaos in Germany. A threat, somehow yes and no. The FDP being very concrete, making very good proposals, I'd say, about an immigration law in Germany, but also about deportations, how to fasten deportations, how to fasten the procedure of asylum seekers claims in the centers, to how to react to them. And then we have the CSU here. It's the Bavarian party, actually. I'm from Bavaria, so it's actually a party that governs Bavaria since its establishment. For the CSU, it was a topic, a center-right party, that usually used to be a winning topic. So some are positive, but mostly negative. It was a threat to Bavarian culture, what the CSU said. And the CSU was also somehow concrete. But here you can see CDU and CSU, who form a fraction community in the parliament, which was very successful for the whole German democracy since 1949. And this important issue stood completely disunited. There was a big, big dispute between those parties. And what you have to know, and that's where we go back to Bavaria, to my hometown, Munich, populism. Yeah, populism, right-wing populism is a threat to democracy, I agree. But in Bavaria, populism was always part of democracy. And even before, if I was a king or a duke of Bavaria, Bavarian people would give me a hard time if I would not respond to their questions. So to stand a beer tent and a beer festival in Bavaria, it is important, you have to do it. So politics and beer in Bavaria, it's tradition. Yeah? And we go to borough of Trudering, it's this part of Munich here, but you see the election result of Munich here, it's not Budapest, no? It's a very uniform country, it's a conservative city. It sends 23 votes to the Conservatives and 3 votes here in the south of the center to the Green Party, so no vote to the SPD this time. It's not Budapest, eh? And the party leaders, Mr. Seehofer, whom you can see here, and Mrs. Merkel, they thought it's a good idea, let's send Angela Merkel to Trudering, to this beer festival, and let's give her the chance to address Bavarian voters, because Trudering is actually a stronghold of the Conservative Party. They have to win it here, and they have to have a good result in Trudering if they want to win Munich. And The idea was, let's make some advertisement, let's the local MP, Mr. Steffinger here, the Prime Minister and Mrs. Merkel, let's bring them together in tutoring and let's look for reconciliation if it's possible. If you look at the pictures here, I promise you this is not the worst picture I could find. This process of reconciliation in May 2017 failed. It completely failed. Mrs. Merkel did not give the audience what the audience wanted to hear. She avoided migration. The audience did not woo her out, but they also did not really cheer. So the faces of the protagonists here say a lot. The union parties entered the parliamentary campaign for the elections in disunity. They could not manage to find a common line, and the voters really felt a bit desperate. What can we do with that? Are you now for migration or are you against migration? And what is your concept according to migration after 2017? So why should we vote for you? What are your plans with migration? What do you want to do? And that's actually how I would explain the results. Yeah, the union parties, Mrs. Merkel's strategy, win the center. You win the election in the center, it's true. She won the center, but she lost the core voters. She lost the right-wing voters, which were always an integral part of the party, and which are at the moment a bit homeless, to be honest. It was possible that without CDU-CSU, no government would have been formed. So the CDU-CSU were in the center of the government forming process, and Mrs. Merkel could retain the chancellery she started in her next 4 years. It's 3.5 years now because we had a lot of problems in forming government now. But of course, the dispute is not solved. The question is, what do we want? Do we want to govern all the time with the SPD in the Grand Coalition? And what about the party program? I mean, with a dispute with the CDU and the CSU, how can we come to an update of our program? What is our program? What do we really want to achieve in the next 4 years? And that's a big question mark. I mean, for the SPD, it's an announced debacle. The SPD could not respond to the question of migration. They had Mr. Schulz, who tried it with Europe. Mr. Schulz performing very bad in the electoral campaign. The electoral record for the SPD was very bad. They tried, there was this Schulz-Zug, so the Schulz train, who would start in Brussels, go to Saarbrücken, Kiel, Düsseldorf, and then straight to Berlin, marking the electoral campaign in Germany. The SPD lost all 3 of those elections before the federal elections in the Saarland, in Schleswig-Holstein, and even their core land, North Rhine-Westphalia. So Mr. Schulz really had a bad campaign. You could also see that between the electorate of the SPD and militants, so the rank and file, there was big disagreement what to do with the migrants. The SPD militants, quite friendly, center-left party to migrants. The electorate in the Ruhrgebiet, for example, or in Saxony, they were not really happy about more migrants to be there. The AfD, they profited from high turnout. The AfD could really manage to get protest voters coming to the polling stations. And the campaign was quite successful. I mean, the AfD had problems because the rhetoric of the AfD was quite right-wing, and I think if they would have been a bit more moderate, 13% would not be the end for the AfD. It would be 15%, 16, 17% possible. But the campaign was sometimes a bit too radical and probably drove more people to vote for liberals. The liberals in Germany, here the right-wing liberals, the FDP with Mr. Lindner, could be seen as a right-wing party, a right-wing liberal party. Campaign very successful. Mr. Lindner really managed to bring the FDP as an alternative party, as a party for the government with the CDU, an alternative to the Grand Coalition, because Grand Coalition was not very popular in Germany at those times. I mean, now we know that he did not want to govern with the CDU-CSU and the Greens. He only wanted the CDU-CSU. But in those days, before the election, people thought, okay, if we vote for the FDP, we get a quite conservative migration policy, and we get an alternative to Grand Coalition. So we can replace SPD, and we can get Mrs. Merkel governing with the liberals. Mrs. Wagenknecht, here for the left, she was a plus, I'd say, because she could limit the loss in the East. The left party lost in the East, voters to the AfD, but they won voters in the West, and I'd say with Mrs. Wagenknecht as representative of the East, they could limit their loss in the East to the AfD in this way. The Greens, yes, they could bring out the core voters. The core voters, as I said, liked it, but it was only the core voters. So the Greens did not really make any progress with the politics they did on migration. That's so far for them. So how can you answer the question? I clearly said, yes, the AfD, they did exploit the issue, of course. And I want to quote the journalist from the Frankfurter Allgemeine Zeitung. He said the AfD was a fire alarm. and the fire accelerant. Why? Because on the one hand, they detected a problem. They detected a problem of migration which was not responded properly by the Conservative Party in Germany, by the Social Democratic Party. So of course they used populist rhetoric, they used a very aggressive anti-immigration discourse, and they of course could use this very high protest potential within former non-voters. And with migration as a topic, they detected this open flank of CDU-CSU, SPD and the left party in the East. So how was it possible? As I said, it was this dispute between Mrs. Merkel and the CSU. The tactic of Mrs. Merkel, how did she manage to stay chancellor in Germany for that long time? It was called asymmetric mobilization. This means she brings the CDU to the center and she takes over position of the Social Democrats. This worked perfectly well with the SPD. The SPD has a big problem with Mrs. Merkel. But at the moment, when we have unrest and when the turnout goes up, when there is no possibility for demobilization because the people want to be mobilized, and the AfD mobilizes people, and the FDP also mobilizes people as there's an urgent issue like migration, this strategy with demobilization could not work. And as I said, the core voters felt ignored, and they were staying at home, going to the FDP or the AfD. And the FDP, despite being very successful, could not absorb all of those protest votes, in particular in the East. They could do this in Bavaria to some extent, in North Rhine-Westphalia, Schleswig-Holstein, but they could not do this in the East, for example. And the left, of course, because of migration in the East, could not do it very good as well. And the Greens, of course, they ignored the potential. The Greens marked those people as xenophobic and racist, so the Greens really focused on their core voters, and they did probably not want to have those voters from the Conservative Party. So let's go back again, for last time to conclude, to Bavaria. We have had another festival 2 weeks ago. A new prime minister, Mr. Söder, is now prime minister, and we have again a one-man show. And what did he say? So he addressed the topic of migration. Mrs. Merkel did not do. He started saying, who comes to Bavaria and needs protection should get it. The audience was not really happy with that. And then he said, okay, I need to give the audience what they probably want to hear. Now we come to populism, but what could he do? And you see, the reaction was that the tent cheered and applauded him. So it's not that easy to deal with populism when populism is part of your political culture in some ways. And as I said, this is even pre-democracy Bavaria. This goes back to the Middle Ages. And this is part of democracy, even so in Baden-Württemberg, for example, in Hesse. You cannot only say AfD is populistic. It is, but it's not a solution. So what are we likely to see? I mean, the CDU-CSU has the question, who will succeed Mrs. Merkel? And how can we retain a chancellery? For the CDU, it's important to govern. The CSU, on the other hand, is now focusing completely on Bavaria, on the core voters. What do our core voters want? So it's very tricky. How can you govern the CSU in Berlin at the moment? Because the CSU is focusing on Munich, not on Berlin. The AfD, why should they change the topic? The AfD found the winning topic, it's migration, and I do not expect that they will change the topic. For liberals, it's very tricky because they want to keep the 11%. 11%, most of them are conservative voters from the union parties, and they still wanted to be somehow liberal. So it's very tricky for them to find a balance at the moment. The left needs to question itself, should we reposition? Does our political party program allow us to reposition in the way Mrs. Wagenknecht wants, or should we stay with our position of open borders? And then we have Greens and SPD, and the Greens at the moment ask themselves, what do we have to do to become a dominant center-left party? In the SPD, it's struggling, it's SOS, yeah. The SPD at the moment does not know where will it be in 3 years. Will we go the way like the Dutch party, 9 seats in the parliament, or will we govern some strange in the government? It's not easy for the SPD at the moment, and they have a tough race with the Greens. In several states like Bavaria, Schleswig-Holstein, the Greens already overtook the SPD. So they are also not really focusing on migration at the moment. It is really the AfD, the CSU, and the FDP, so the center-right, focusing on migration. And we have a lot of scandals at the moment according to migration, and we are likely to see that there will be an investigation committee in the Bundestag that will investigate 2015 Mrs. Merkel's opening of the border. So the FDP wants it, the AfD will support it, and probably even the CSU will support it, because the people are dissatisfied with the program of Mrs. Merkel, and we will not come out of this topic without a clear approach what did really happen in 2015. And yeah, that's what we are likely to see the next 3 years, I expect. And migration, of course, will be a dominant topic the next 3 years. Thank you very much.
Well, others also have a good time. I hope you do too. Now we are going to travel a little bit further to the east. We are going to talk about the Czech Republic. Personally, it was one of the most interesting studies for me in the book because I knew nothing about it, so it was completely new to me, and it was very interesting. It seems that in the Czech Republic, migration was also a hot election topic. Whether it was something that determined the outcomes of the election, we are going to learn from Tereza Kmelikova, who is an analyst in the Institute of Politics and Society. Welcome, and the floor is yours.
Hello. First of all, thank you for inviting me. It's a great pleasure for me to be here. Well, to introduce myself, my name is Tereza Kmelikova, and the Institute for Politics and Society was established by Andrej Babiš, who is currently our Prime Minister in demission. Now we have a kind of political crisis, so it's really complicated and a little bit messed up, let's say. I will. Do I have? Yeah. I will get to the point to get you more familiar with our political scene, but it's really complicated. So just not so deep as my previous colleagues, but I would like to go the other way around. So because I suppose that you are not really familiar with the Czech Republic political scene or situation. So just some basic facts on the beginning, and then we will go to the political electoral results, and then how the campaign was like. So the basic facts only: 10.5 million people lives in my country, and the Czech Republic is considered to be in top 10 of the safest countries in the world. It's really important indicator, as well as the level of unemployment, which is the lowest in the whole European Union. It's now around 3%. We have in my country there live around 500,000 foreigners. So it's quite significant number. Despite of this, the Czech government has really strict approach to asylum seekers. Currently, we have a little bit more than 3,000 asylums in the Czech Republic. Last year, means in 2017, there was around 1,500 asylum seekers, and only 29 of them were granted. So the Czech Republic has this kind of Visegrad Group attitude towards immigration. The Czech government criticized the European Union's approach to the immigration crisis, and also the principle of redistribution of immigrants. In June, I guess, yeah, in June 2017, only 4 months before our general election, Czech government stated that we are not going to accept any immigrants based on quota system, and till the time we accept 12 immigrants from Greece. So from the 2000 2,600 immigrants, which the Czech Republic should have accepted on the base of quotas. We accepted only 12, and we are not going to accept anymore. So, yeah, it's just something to get like a basic frame. The public opinion in the Czech Republic, because of the rhetorics of Czech government and now the rise of populism and extremism in the Czech society, this is the result of all the consequences and like the atmosphere in the society. The public opinion on immigration. Here we can see the results of Public Opinion Research Center on the topic of public attitudes towards refugees and so-called quotas. Only 4/5 of Czech people are rejecting quotas. So really, most of them. And here you can see the question was, do you think the Czech Republic should accept immigrants from war zones? And in October 2017, 69% said no, we should not accept them. Don't be confused, the light blue, 25% said that the respondents said that we should accept them, but only till the time they will be able to go back to their countries of origin. So only 2% of Czech people are willing to accept immigrants and let them to settle down. So this is the mood in the society. Now, the general elections of 2017, of course, these public opinions or attitudes were projected in the election results. The result of elections was that we have now 9 political parties in the Czech Parliament, which is the highest number in the history. Our Parliament is very fragmented, and it caused the political crisis right now. The extremist SPD party, with its leader Tomio Okamura, which, believes me, is not a Czech name at all. It sounds like Japanese because he's originally from Japan. So our the most visible protector of national Czech interests gained more than 10% of the vote, and he entered the parliament for the first time in 2013 with another party, also far right-wing party, Úsvit, but because of the, I don't know, some kind of inner problems, he established a new party afterwards, and with this party in 2017 he doubled his electoral gain. So now you can see the results here. Well, let's see. Yeah, the SPD is on the 4th place, which is like really extreme success. With a new party in parliament as well, Pirate Party, which are really liberal and they are willing to help all refugees. But I think they are the only one in Czech parliament. Then the rest of the parties are well-established traditional parties usually. You can see with 15 votes, it's on the in orange color, Social Democrats, which this is the worst electoral result in Social Democrats' history, because it was really a traditional party in our parliament, and now they're struggling to stay there. And yeah, we have Christians and 2 more conservative parties. And all of these parties, like the 4th ones, they are willing to help refugees, but in the countries, sorry, in countries of origin. So they prefer to, I don't know, to the Czech Republic to support financially refugees in their homeland countries. They are not willing to let them to enter in our country. On the first place, there is the movement ANO, with its leader Andrej Babiš, who established the Institute for Politics and Society. Well, now he is considered to be a pragmatical politic. So his attitude towards immigration is kind of confusing, I think even for him, because he would like to be leader, one of the leaders of the European Union. He loves the Czech Republic to be a strong country in the European Union. On the other hand, his attitude towards quotas and everything says the opposite. It follows the Visegrad Group attitudes. So he was promoting national interest during the whole campaign, and he's promoting it now as well, because, as I said, we are in political crisis, so maybe we will have another election soon. But still, he is one side in the European Union and one side in Visegrad Group, like with his opinions. Well, so yeah, the SPD and SPD was really focused on the refugees and immigration topic, as well as ANO, because Andrej Babiš was well aware that this topic will attract some voters for him. So why was the populism really successful in the recent elections? Here you can see Andrej Babiš. We want better Czechia, safer one. Well, Czech Republic is considered to be in top 10 safest countries in the world. So why we need to be safer? Well, because people want to hear it. People think that they are threatened by immigrants, as you can see from the public opinion results. So, of course, we want better, we want safer. Really, Andrej Babiš is pragmatic politician, so he always follows what like public desires. So safer, but still the message is clear: safer Czechia means there is a reference to migration crisis, but it's still a little bit hidden. Which wasn't hidden at all was like the atmosphere in SPD's political campaign. No Islam, no terrorists, safer country for everybody. Tomio Okamura was very direct and open in his anti-EU attitudes and anti-immigrant attitudes in the slogans of his campaign. And no Islam. He wanted to provoke the fear in Czech society. It was his intention to provoke the fear and spread it around the society, and it quite worked. Really, it was pretty successful strategy. We will stop illegal immigration and the EU's dictate again. Stop EU's dictate. Okamura publicly rejected the quota and also the whole European Union project, and he is calling for the public or national referendum for Czechia. And one of the slogans says, we are going to live in a British style. So again, he's presenting, he was in the campaign presenting himself as a defender of Czech national interests and our values and Czech culture. And as you can see, it's quite a paradox that Japanese origin is our main defender of Czech interests and nation. Well. Also, with the quotas, they're of course rejecting quotas, and because like Czech Republic and before Czechoslovakia, we have really like some major twists in our history and some datas like 1939 when Nazis came and they established a protectorate of women and Mähren. They are really touchy in our hearts and in our minds, and Okamura is very well aware of it. So he compared quotas to the Nazi occupation of Czechoslovakia, for example. Or even more touchy topic is the year 1968, where the Soviet Union's interrupt Prague Spring, and they established a communist regime for 40 years. Of course, you're well aware of this fact, I guess. So he compared it to the same, like that quotas are the Nazis' occupation or Soviet Union occupation. Well, yes, I'm getting to actually the point of my part in this booklet was that our president, as you can see on the picture, this is Miloš Zeman, the president of the Czech Republic, and the guy on the right is Tomio Okamura. The president and the presidential elections, which was held in January this year, is the major anti-immigrant political voice in our country. And so you can see, here you can see the picture of our president and Tomio Okamura on the date when Miloš Zeman was re-elected in January. And quite unexpectedly, the topic, well, it wasn't unexpectedly, because during the old term, when Miloš Zeman was in the office, in the first term, he was growing his popularity on the migration topic, systematically, let's say. He was presented himself as a defender of Czech nation. He was talking about immigrants in terms of flood and this kind of like terms who are associated with negative connotations and feelings. And so he, of course, he continued doing the same during his political campaign before the presidential elections. So now they are supporting each other. Tomio Okamura, the leader of SPD, and the head of our state, they are supporting each other in this issue, and it's really kind of paradox, let's say. Before this first round of the election, president election, Miloš Zeman wasn't participate in he didn't want to participate in TV debates and so on. But before the second round, he joined the campaign, and it became very aggressive. It really it became very aggressive towards his counter-candidate Jiří Drahoš, which is a professor from a university and researcher. And we could see, Czech people could see in a newspaper, for example, advertisement saying "Stop immigrants and Drahoš. This country is ours." Word for Zeman. And the main message for Czech people was the connection Mr. Drahoš with immigration, and in order to encourage in Czech people the negative feelings, because it's really touchy topic, even though we don't have any. So there were pictures like this that when Mr. Drahoš was presented as an immigrant welcomer, and that he was his campaign is actually financed by oligarchs who wants to establish new world order. So in this aim, they are going to support immigration to be able to establish some new system. And so this advertisement said that the campaign of Mr. Drahos is financed by oligarchs like George Soros, or our in Czech society well-known Zdeněk Bakala, or even the Muslim Brotherhood in Czech Republic. So they were statements which was totally, let's say, crazy. But the worst, I don't know what else, yeah. The worst thing is that in the campaign, during the campaign, presidential campaign, we were witnesses of a huge disinformation campaign against the counter presidential candidate, Mr. Drahos, and there was sent. It was targeted on the seniors, which usually vote for Miloš Zeman, and there was a huge email campaign. Many or thousands of emails were distributed with like really attacking texts towards Mr. Drahos, saying that he is a pedophile and he's stealing some thoughts of other researchers and so on. Like really, it was full of lies, and that's the main problem in my country, I think, and it's really connected with migration topic, because the lie became somehow the major tool of political campaigning. So disinformation became legal somehow, and nobody is protesting about it. I mean, in a political era. Yes. On the second picture. On the second picture, you can see the private TV Barrandov of Jaromír Soukup. In the middle, there is the owner of TV, Jaromír Soukup, and next to him, Tomio Okamura. They had a huge political debate together, like a duel, and afterwards they had a meeting or something like this. And the point is that this TV hosts one program, weekly program, where President Miloš Zeman is talking about current topics in Czech politics. So Miloš Zeman attends every week this private TV, who is cooperating with SPD and everything. And Miloš Zeman is against and criticized all the time Czech TV. This is the sign of Czech TV. This one, the national TV, that they are let's say they are financed by some oligarchs, and they are not unsighted. Huh? Yeah. So the main point is that our political representatives decided to participate on this disinformation, spreading disinformation, and of course, the most convenient topic for spreading fear and so on is migration, and it was projected into the political results of our elections, not only parliamentary one but presidential one as well. And I will just read you because I can remember it by my heart. So in October 2015. President Zeman was criticized by United Nations High Commissioner for Human Rights, Zaid Rad Hussein, for his xenophobic and Islamophobic speeches. Hussein also condemned that the Czech Republic attitude to refugees is general. And now I will quote what he said. According to credible reports from various sources, violations of migrants' human rights and are neither singular nor random, but systematic. It seems to be an integral part of the Czech government's policy aimed to deterring immigrants and refugees from entering the country or staying there. So it seems that anti-immigrant policy became the part of our system, let's say, political system. And of course, we are criticized by the outside actors, political actors, and the response to from our president was that it's a pointless drivel, and he's not going to change his attitude because there is no reason to change it. Of course, there is no reason because he was re-elected, so it works. So yeah, that's the point. And on the beginning, I told you that we have only 12 immigrants which we accepted from based on quotas and 3,000 asylants. So in 10 million people, it's like nothing. Of course, we have capacity to accept more and help some people, but still the topic is really living in society. Well, yeah, just to end like optimistically, one week ago I read a joke on the internet on Facebook, which says that do you know the difference between refugee and Chinese investments in the Czech Republic? Well, there is none, because everybody is talking about it all the time, and nobody has ever seen it. So, and that's the real point, really. So thank you very much for your attention, and sorry for my English.
Thank you very much for this presentation. Now we are traveling further east. We are coming home. The last presentation is on behalf of Csaba Tóth, ELF board member, director of strategy at Republikon. He is going to talk about the Hungarian situation and the Hungarian electoral campaign that just finished. Csaba, the floor is yours.
Thank you, ladies and gentlemen. I will share you a secret. The reason I am last in this panel is that I can save some time for discussion, because, of course, most of you here are familiar with the Hungarian election campaign and how it went. So I will try to be really, really brief. We don't have, that is why we don't have an article in the booklet about the Hungarian campaign. Of course, Republikon does a lot of research on that, but I think the focus was on the foreign campaigns now. And I will just share with you a few thoughts, and I term this first thoughts because my main message is that one of the reasons I think that Fidesz and Viktor Orbán's party got a 2/3 majority was that we had very little information on what was actually going on in voters' minds, also due to lack of polling, also due to not understanding maybe the campaign dynamic. And well, frankly, we still don't know. Some of the numbers I will show you will be from 2017, 2018. So what actually happened in the election campaign, how people perceived those campaigns. We know, of course, from the result, but any detailed analysis will have to stay. Again, I am sorry for our Hungarian guests. I will say very few surprising words. But maybe our foreign guests and those of you following us via live stream will learn a few things from this. I will basically say 5 things. One, on the migration issue, voters overwhelmingly support the government position. Second, as a result, the government's very clear attempt in this campaign was to frame the whole issue around migration. The government always talked about migration, how the opposition is for migration, for Islam, for breaking down the fence, whereas the government is against that. Of course, the third is that the opposition had very divergent strategies. I will spend a bit more time on trying to analyze this. The campaign was about the opposition trying to say, well, maybe we can get by not talking about this issue. This looked a reasonable strategy for some, mainly, of course, because of the huge corruption scandals associated with the government. And of course, we can see that the issue is here to stay. So I thought you all know the campaign dynamics. I will show you some pieces of data on the overwhelming support for the Fidesz position, and this is part of a longer presentation, so I will skip some parts of the data. Hungary should accept 1,000 refugees from war-torn territories. Now look at this. This is clearly refugees and from war-torn territories. So clearly stating in the argument that these are refugees, these are not economic migrants, these are people who are fleeing from war. 2% of the population totally agrees with this statement, and 9% agrees. 11% supports accepting those refugees. Whereas, and look at the other side, 37% totally disagree. We shouldn't accept these refugees, again, fleeing from war. 24% disagree. So altogether, these two numbers, if you add them up, more than 60% very clearly against even this sort of very humanitarian issue. Clearly, a very small percentage support. Clearly, majority is on the side of the government. Now, of course, we can debate how that majority arose, all those other issues, but I think it's clear. If you look at this from the party perspective, if you look at Jobbik voters, sort of left liberal voters, so everybody not Fidesz and not Jobbik, and Fidesz voters, even, among sort of the left liberal parties, only 20% agreeing to accept refugees, 49% disagreeing. So in every voting bloc, very clear majority. Of course, the government knew this. Of course, the opposition knew this as well. But I think it's always striking to see the overwhelming support for this. Of course, in the end, Fidesz got about as many voters as all the opposition votes combined. So in the end, not, of course, in parliament because of the electoral system, but in the end, half of the population voted for Fidesz, half voted for somebody else. So, of course, not everybody voted on the refugee issues, but I think this is a very striking number. Again, risk between refugees and terrorism, sometimes claimed by the government. Refugees from war-torn territories pose a national security risk. 60% agree, only 8% disagree. Again, it has many reasons. Hungarian people are usually in security issues, tend to be more afraid maybe than Western European countries. Maybe we could ask who else poses a national security risk. And frankly, this was not necessarily an issue that was very much on the agenda. Terrorism and migration was not really linked, even in government communication, maybe something that will change. Again, you don't see all that much of a difference. Fidesz voters overwhelmingly agreeing with the government, but even left liberal voters, 46% agreeing with the government position. And of course, those in Hungary know very well these posters, but for international guests, they would dismantle the fence together. A government communication, which I think is remarkable because each and every statement is false. It says, together they would get rid of the fence. Now, these parties did everything, but they were not together. So these people very, very often refuse to cooperate. So claiming they want to do anything together is already an exaggeration. Now, saying they would want to remove the fence is, and of course, I'm in a more difficult position because in the audience we have candidates and members of parliament from some of these parties, so they will correct me if I'm wrong, but I think Ferenc Gyurcsány said that, well, the fence is now here, so he was not arguing for dismantling it actively, but all the other three very clearly stated that they would not want to dismantle the fence. So on both accounts, of course, this government communication is clearly false. Now, they said that they are basing this argument on previous statements from years ago. But of course, this was everywhere, and of course, we should not let George Soros laugh at the end, or we should not let George Soros have the last laugh, and we should stop Brussels. We should stop Brussels again. Needless to remind you, all this from public money. I will not even get into this. Even though, of course, all the communication, all the money spent is in a very clear violation, I think, of the spirit of how an election campaign should be run. The government narrative itself, the argument Fidesz makes, is of course an argument many people make in Europe. Just to dissect it in a way, Fidesz is saying, well, there's a migration crisis that the opposition for a very long time denied. This crisis would mean that the demographic composition of Europe would change. Of course, we don't have migrants in Hungary, they would say, but the question is, will we have in the future? So the debate isn't about that. This demographic change is encouraged by liberals, first and foremost, who believe in multiculturalism, and also by Brussels, who are, of course, all liberals, and who want to weaken the nation states. So as you can see, even, of course, many elements of that argument can be contested. They are coherent in themselves. Of course, George Soros and his Open Society is a key actor in this. NGOs and opposition parties to varying degrees agree with it. Hungarian people will not, so the Hungarian government will protect the Hungarian people. So that is a very coherent argument in a way, very false argument in many ways, but very coherent one, I would say. Yeah, I would just go on to the opposition strategies, and I think one of the most striking thing is that even I, who follow Hungarian politics quite closely, had trouble identifying what the opposition stands for. Now, that is not to say, of course, that there are, of course, very sophisticated and detailed proposals from most opposition sides. But in the end of the day, if you ask, well, what does the opposition want on the migration issue, it's a difficult question to ask. And it's also difficult because there are at least 5 different positions on this. And some of those positions exist within one party. The first is to say, well, we totally agree with the government. This makes political sense, so the argument claims, because this is a no-win thing for us as the opposition. So we should just say, we hate the fans, sorry, we love the fans, again, slip of the tongue. We love the fans, we agree with the government, let's move on. Very recently after the election, Péter Ungár, a prominent person in the Green Party, wrote this very thing in an article, that this is what the opposition strategy should be. We have no argument with the government on this, let's move on to other issues. Then the second position is we say the fence should stay, but this is, I would say, the mainstream argument of the Socialist Party, the biggest leftist opposition party, saying the fence is okay, but, and then you can argue with some elements of it, but it's inhumane, but it doesn't work, but it costs too much, but it's only on some part of the border, as Péter Balázs said, but it doesn't solve anything, but it should not be accompanied by a hate campaign. So basically arguing over details. The third is ridiculing a campaign. Most popular among my Budapest liberal friends, making fun of this position, but of course very much not popular, I think, outside of certain liberal circles. Position number 4 is openly saying, in some way, getting on the other side of the argument, either saying that the fence is a bad idea, openly saying, well, multiculturalism is good, or openly saying the quotas are okay. The Democratic Coalition, Ferenc Gyurcsány's party, presents some kind of strategy of this, basically saying, yeah, well, yes, we are in opposition to the government. As you see, positions number 1 and 4 are totally against each other. Position number 1 says, well, the government is basically right. Position number 4 says, no, the government is altogether wrong on this issue. And of course, number 5 is, which is a Jobbik position, saying, well, the government is hypocritical, because while they are fighting while they're fighting against refugees, they are also accepting so-called residency bond supporters. Yeah. Well, I would say Momentum's position is either 1 or 2. Momentum is for the fence on the record. So I would say that they're probably number 2. Of course, much internal division, as in all opposition parties. As you see, all options have their drawbacks. This is just a number of, for the Jobbik position, Hungary should provide the opportunity for 1,000 foreigners who purchase residency bonds to settle in the country. Again, you see a total disagreement. So this would be the argument for Jobbik's position, which could maybe have worked. But I think the main argument I would want to make here is that these positions were represented sometimes within by one party, and very often conflicting with one another. And this is going to be basically my last slide on how this all turned out. Because these were positions. So what were on the strategic sides? What were the strategy? The opposition strategy was basically, well, yes, the government will be talking about migration. No matter what our position is, migration issue is unwinnable. Either we agree with the government, but that, of course, is a very difficult position for an opposition, or we go against the government, but then we become the minority. So I think the consensus on the opposition side was, well, let's try not to talk about migration. And let's try to do two things. First of all, build up our own stories, build up our own messages, and second of all, talk about the government corruption. Talking about the government corruption did occur in the media. How much impact it had is debatable. It seems not much, but of course we don't know what would have happened without those. Government corruption scandals were featured very prominently in opposition media, but the other narratives, those were completely absent. I would make the argument that they were very, very few ideas, very few notions from the opposition which could be built up in the campaign, mainly for two reasons. One is maybe the lack of time and the fact that the opposition just didn't come up with anything that was very strategic in nature. And of course the second is that divisions within the opposition and the discussion about how, in what format the opposition should run. Hungarian members of the audience have had, I think, enough of this, but this is the debate about coordinations, joint lists, running together or running separately, which of course is a very bad thing to talk about, but something that's vital, of course, in the Hungarian electoral system, which is of course a single constituency system. Mathematically speaking, you would need coordination against Fidesz, but of course most of those parties interested in the coordination followed their own interest. As of course the government strategy was very clear, let's just leave this all, let's talk about the migration issue, very consistently for months and saying, these guys, they argue among themselves all the time, all they want to do is get rid of the fence which protects us. And as of course, it is always important to remember in the Hungarian context, the government has a massive resource advantage, not just necessarily media advantage, but resource advantage when having their campaigns, running their campaigns. The budget that the government spent in 2017 before the campaign is about 100 times as much as all the opposition parties combined in the campaign. So of course there's a very huge opportunity for the government to build this message up. It's not just that they are genius or that they are smart, but they do control much of the media, and they are very shameless in using public money, officially not party, but government information campaigns to communicate the message. Some of those posters you saw were government information campaigns. It's I'm giving you the information that migrants are horrible, that we are protecting from migrants. Of course, post-election analysis is needed, but what we see now is clearly that the government approach was successful. We don't know how much the opposition could have changed even if it had figured out how to approach this migration issue, but it was clear that hypothesis one didn't work. And it mainly didn't work, I think, because of the massive resource advantage that the government had. It might be feasible, and you talked about in the Dutch case, a bit also in the Czech case, but mainly in the Dutch case, that some parties just talked about different things. Clearly in the media environment and with the government's resource advantage, looking back now, it was probably naive to think that this issue could be sidelined. But of course there's a very intense debate on how this issue is in the Hungarian context. Now, of course we could just spend the whole day talking about the Hungarian issues, but I will finish now and leave room for discussion. Thank you so much.
So now I would like to ask all our panelists to please come to the table, and let's delve into the discussion we have ahead of us. We wait 2 minutes for one of our participants and then we start. All right, so that now everybody is here, I would like to warmly welcome again all our panelists. Thank you very much for staying with us. The first question I would like to ask, based on your presentations and based on the book, many of you mentioned in writing certainly that cultural issues are becoming dominant in your countries and they are starting to dominate electoral debates. Do you agree with the thesis that we are experiencing a shift from economic cleavages to cultural cleavages all around Europe? Is it the same thing that sometimes we hear as the global-local cleavage, or it's something else? How do you see it in your case studies in your countries?
How about, yes, now it works. Yes, I would definitely say so. Cultural issues have become very big. And this actually is, I'm glad to have this opportunity to address this, because I didn't do that as much as I had hoped to in the presentation, because this is part of the debate. So how to address migration, and especially how to address the related topic of national identity, because that's at least what's happening now in the Netherlands, that the topic of migration ends up evolving about threat to Dutch culture, Dutch national identity. And what we see is that it's not, it's a bit of a chicken and egg story. Is this a real concern of the people, or is this being made into a real concern by political parties? It's hard to say, and I think this actually really demands much more research to understand where this is coming from. I think personally, my opinion here, that yes, there are real concerns about changing culture, about what this multicultural society is doing to Dutch national identity. There are real concerns. At the same time, they are being tremendously reinforced by identity politics. If we look at the 2017 elections, both the Christian Democrats and also the VVD very much played the identity card. And with that identity card, they played it in such a way that they, I think to a certain extent, normalized the identity politics of the populist. The Geert Wilders was very extreme, our country that has to be protected, and the Christian Democrats and the VVD, they made it a little bit more of a moderate story. They talked about broader Judeo-Christian heritage that had to be protected, or aren't we in the Netherlands all normal and we should all be normal? That was very much the line of the VVD. But it all connected with, I think, the narrative of Geert Wilders in a more moderate way, and very strong focus on culture.
Well, I would agree. We are living in a high standard level society, so there is a need to find some new topics, new threats to our lives, and but I will go back to the point of my presentation. I think that the main point is that the internet became the main communication channel and mobilization channel of the protest or populist parties, and there is somehow lack of validity control of the information which are posted on the internet. So I would say that we are now in a fake news age and disinformation age. So in my opinion, the government should be focused on promoting the truth and the correct information and so on. So to educate people more, to avoid further rise of populism.
Yes, I would agree to this as well. I think it's a big mistake the left in Germany made. They were saying we just need to spend more money and this will actually then solve the problem. It is not solved by that. I mean, we can see in rich regions in Germany like Baden-Württemberg, Bavaria, Hesse, that the AfD here was very strong. And these are actually regions where the national or the regional culture to be Hessian, to be Bavarian, is very strong. So I would not say it's new. They don't invent something new. Topic of identity was always important in Germany, was always a topic for the conservative parties, for the Christian Democrats. The CSU tried to play it in Bavaria, failed this time, because the CDU didn't want to play the identity card, as it was mentioned there. So, and it also explains why the CDU lost not that much in Schleswig-Holstein, for example, or in Lower Saxony, but quite harshly in Baden-Württemberg, Saxony, Thuringia. Because those countries in the east of Germany, like Thuringia, Saxony, Pomerania, I think after the GDR, they're in need of a new culture, of a new regional identity. And the CDU was very good in forming Pomeranian identity, forming Saxon identity. And this time, as they did not want to play identity card, I think it explains why they lost that much in those areas to AfD, because AfD played the card. AfD succeeded the CDU in playing the card. And yeah, I think we definitely should focus more on those issues for the core voters, and we will see how it ends.
Just very quickly add to this, because I think you remind me of a major dilemma that we found in this whole campaign was indeed that the left and also the progressive parties, they tend to focus on social economic aspects. So for example, especially when it comes to integration of refugees and immigrants, it's all about, yeah, they have to learn the language, they have to get jobs, and then all will be fine. And that it's very, very important, but that indeed is not enough to address those cultural issues that are of real concern. And I think, indeed, right now, progressive and left parties, liberal parties, have not really come up with a decent answer. The only answer is then, indeed, of parties like the Christian Democrats or the conservative liberals to then also start talking about identity and, as such, normalizing that identity politics of the populist.
I think what was in this campaign and many campaigns, conventional wisdom, turns out wrong conventional wisdom, was that if this election is about migration and national identity, then Fidesz will certainly win. So the job of the opposition is to make this an election about healthcare, about education, about social issues. And of course, we don't know whether it was a flawed strategy to begin with, or whether it was just that they didn't manage to do that they didn't manage to find attractive, appealing narratives, appealing ideas in those issues. But, and of course the other sort of more of a question is, certainly if you look at the numbers in Hungary, if you build a political message on sort of maybe a more tolerant, more European-looking identity, that is going to be the minority for a very long time, or at least for some time. Now, that is, of course, for a party like D66 or its equivalent in Hungary, a party that aims at 5 to 10, 15%, that might be a very suitable strategy. How you get to a majority from there is, of course, different, having given the fact that, of course, we have a different electoral system, so just pursuing your 5 to 10% is not necessarily a good strategy. But I think in the future points towards identity politics, even in countries that are, let me just, and this is where I stop. My favorite example is always the British Labour Party, you know, the traditional leftist party, which is strongest in Islington and inner London, the most rich parts of the European Union. And I think D66 is also the strongest in Amsterdam and in those parts of the Netherlands, which are very much rich, of course, also very multicultural. And it has to do probably more with identity than with social issues.
Let's continue from here, because you had a a half sentence that was very interesting, that liberal parties have a hard time finding a suitable answer to identity questions. Is it linked to the fact that liberalism is traditionally universalist? So from an ideological point of view, local identities are hard to theorize in liberalism, or it's linked to practical political reasons?
Well, yeah, I think good point. I shouldn't be the first one to respond to this, actually. So, yeah, please. Why don't you go ahead first?
I mean, I can make it very short. Of course, it's very hard for liberal parties, I'd say, as they have this cosmopolitan standpoint, ideology behind it, universalism, hard to perform regional identity. I mean, we had in Germany the saying the FDP is actually a lady which has only an upper body and torso, so it doesn't have a base. Means that the liberals in Bavaria and Germany are very weak in the local area. So they do quite well when it comes to federal elections, to European elections, but they have problems in state elections and in regional elections. So as there are topics like housing more important in local elections, for example. So the FDP has problems here in delivering answers, I'd say, or the liberals have problems because it's not their original topic. I mean, the topic is liberalism. It's maybe that the liberal ideology is focused more on globalization, and now we probably see here a backslash to more regionalism, and I would agree to this thesis.
Well, I would say that we can see that the globalization in combination with immigration paradoxically caused the rise of national demands and interests, and liberalism doesn't have a response for this. So that poses the space for the protest parties to come up with the very easy solutions of very complex problems, and of course people are willing to follow them and to hear them. So yeah, there is the lack of capacity of liberal parties in this, I guess.
Just to add to that, I think one of the biggest problems here is that liberalism tends to focus on the individual, on the freedom of the individual. And what it, I think, underestimates is the need for people to also feel belonging and belonging to community. And I think that's where we go awfully wrong at the moment.
You know, I think in Hungary it's also a matter of sometimes liberals, both parties, and maybe also I think liberal opinion leaders tending to underestimate the Hungarian public and tending to think, well, the Hungarian public is with Fidesz and this conservative and nationalist anyway. And sometimes I think we forget the liberal traditions and the liberal approach and liberal interpretation to nation and identity. And we sometimes, I think, shy away from those topics. And if we don't, we just, rather than having sort of a liberal version of what it means to be Hungarian, a liberal version of what it means to be European, we just accept, well, we either go with the nationalist version, but that is inherently conservative, and that will lead to a lot of problems.
You analyzed the party programs for the elections in question last year, so you know at least what they are saying about migration. Do you see a fine line between mass migration, when a party criticizes migration, and accepting people as such? So there's an argumentation that says that refugees and migrants are okay as long as they don't come in masses. Is there a fine line in any of these programs, or they do not bother with lines like this at all? And if there is a distinction like this, is it on the left, is it on the right, or is it within the liberal political family? Because we saw the two very clear positions, either migration, yes or no. So are there middle grounds?
I'll start to that because I think it's a very important point. always try to argue that I think it's okay for liberals to say something like, you know, Europe can handle 1 million people, it cannot handle 50 million people. I think that would be an argument that I would be comfortable making. But I've never really seen, certainly not in Hungary, anyone making those arguments, because of course human rights lawyers and people involved in the migration business, so to say, would tell you, well, it's impossible to say numbers because these are laws and norms and people who correspond to them should be admitted and people who don't. So by saying numbers, you already play into the hands of your opponents. Now, I disagree with that. I think we could say numbers, but I think in Hungary, everybody, at least on the political party level, everybody shied away from saying, well, you know what, we could actually handle 10,000 people in Hungary. But that does not mean that we believe we could handle 100,000. I think that would be a good argument to make, but that is not actually an argument I think anyone has made here.
Well, in Czech Republic, to be honest, in none of the political programs of our political parties, you cannot find anything about well, supporting immigration in our country. Well, the main something which all of the countries shared is that they are rejecting quotas, but they are willing to help with humanitarian well, aid in the countries of origin. That's the conclusion of all the programs, political programs, but nothing in the middle. No.
Yes, I mean I can just focus on the FDP here because the FDP in Germany has a very clear position. It does not want the 2015 should repeat. It says chaos as we had 2015 is not acceptable for us. We want that it goes on orderly. And as I said, there will be a probably investigation committee. The FDP wants to investigate what happened in 2015. How well was the government prepared? What did the government do? What did the government know? How was Mrs. Merkel prepared or was she not prepared? Was she allowed to open the border? And when we come to the party program, the FDP here clearly distinguishes between migrants, and migrants have to be useful. So they should be picked, and the FDP here wants the Canadian model, Australian model, point model. If you want to come to Germany, you have to reach then that level of points, then you can enter the country. If you're an asylum seeker, we cannot pick you, we cannot choose you, but this means we have to be strict with you. And if you do not behave well, we should use deportation as an option. So the FDP here is very strict, but also distinguishes quite clear that they want to welcome asylum seekers, but if they do not behave well, their claims should be rejected and they should go back to their home country of origin.
Well, just briefly, since this question is indeed also a little bit about that middle way, right? Which ended up being quite an important strategy within the Dutch elections, and to an extent successful. But I think what was problematic with the way the middle way was presented is that it was actually very empty. It was empty of values. It was very pragmatic, and that appealed to people to a certain extent. But in the end, it was not saying clearly what do we stand for and why. Why do we as a nation also want to help and receive refugees? And why do we at one point say, stop here, and how? So I think that is I think very important if you're looking for this middle way, that you keep also making very clear why you want to do these things.
The next question is linked exactly to this, to the FDP and to the opinion leaders and human rights lawyers and the intelligentsia making value-based points. When I take a look at the French situation, when it comes to migration, Emmanuel Macron seems to be a conservative. We see that the FDP had some conservative elements in its policies. Is there a clear liberal standpoint when it comes to this crisis, or there are liberal standpoints and liberal programs? So how do you see internal debates when it comes to the liberal family?
Why is Macron a conservative?
his new migration packages continuing the strict migration policies of François Hollande, who was also kind of conservative compared to Angela Merkel. France decided to accept 30,000 people in internal displacement within the EU. They didn't accept everyone. They have very strict security policies in Calais. They have very strict border policies in the Italian border. And Emmanuel Macron is not only continuing this policy, but he's enforcing and strengthening it. So it's very interesting when his migration package is criticized. It's criticized from the left. It's criticized from the right as not being strict enough, but we understand what sort of argument it is. So how do you see this from within the liberal family? Are there conservative liberals when it comes to migration, and are there progressive liberals? Are there internal debates? How does it play out?
You know, the reason I ask this is that, you know, you say they accepted 30,000, so that in, you know, France is 6 times as bigger.
Well, as compared to Germany, it's really conservative.
So if we would drop that policy in Hungary, that would be a liberal policy, wouldn't it? Because that would say, you know, accept 4,000. And I think that's the crucial difference, is that, and Stefan will correct me there, but, you know, Lindner...
I don't want to interrupt you, it's just that France has a universalist tradition. It's not only liberal, of course, because universalism in France is kind of state-centered, etc., etc. But there is a voter base who really wants universal values and universal solidarity. So there's a French context.
Sure, and of course, liberal and conservative mean different in different countries. I just think it's very important to note, because it appears sometimes, you know, in Hungarian rhetoric, I alluded to this. Rutte is basically saying the same as Orbán. Lindner is basically saying the same as Orbán. And then I saw the Babes poster, which said, well, even though if I go in Hungary to Fidesz circles, they would say, well, Babes is the same as Orbán. But to me, saying, well, you know, we want a safer Czech Republic is very different from saying Soros wants to bring in millions of migrants and the opposition is destroying the fence. It's, of course, also rhetoric, but I think it's also policy. I would have very little problem with saying, you know, we should not accept the quota, and those people who come here as refugees should accept the Hungarian laws, which is, of course, a conservative position in Germany, but would be a liberal position in Hungary. So I think of course, there are more conservative and more liberals in the European Union, but I think rhetoric also matters, and I think it's important to note that even if in some European circles the notion that we should not accept everyone, that's never been the liberal position. That's sometimes the liberal position portrayed by opponents of liberalism.
Yeah. What about the FDP? I mean, Mr. Lindner clearly is the right wing of the FDP. This has something to do with the history of the party. The party always, I mean, in Dutch, in Netherlands, we have 2 liberal parties, so you can say left-wing liberals, right-wing liberals. In Germany, there was only place for 1 liberal party. And they have 2 wings, the social liberal wing and the right, liberal conservative wing, I would say. And those people governing in Germany from 2009 to 2013 were mostly from the centrist social liberal wing. We had a Minister of the Justice, Mrs. Leuthäuser-Schnorrenberger, a very German name. She was quite a social liberal and a prominent figure in those days. The thing was, the party lost the election of 2013, was out the parliamentary for the first time, and this then meant that people like Mr. Lindner, who were a bit more on the center-right, conservative part of the party, were now the new leading figures. And of course, Mr. Lindner saw that with the migration issue and the open flank of the Conservative Party here, he could win a lot. He could ensure that his party would enter the Bundestag. This was his minimum goal. He wanted this in order to stay leader of the party. And then he also saw, okay, if I play the migration campaign wisely, the migration card wisely, I might also get 10% or even more, because the flank of the CDU, the left party, and the SPD is really open, and I might push into that. And that's probably why we see the FDP in Germany now following a quite, as you said, conservative stance according to migration, because they saw it's a winning topic for them. And the social liberal wing of the FDP, who is more universalist, at the moment I'd say they're quite marginalized within the party.
I'm not sure if I'm capable to answer the question, because there is so many liberal parties in Europe, and they differ from each other to the great extent. So you cannot say that liberal is the same. But from my point of view, I would say that the migration topic, because of the rise of populism, became somehow mainstream in traditional parties. The strict attitude towards migration became mainstream. It has to be, because otherwise traditional parties would be lost forever, let's say. So yeah, I don't know if we can call it a conservative approach, but in case of Mr. Babiš in the Czech Republic and the movement ANO, of course, it's he has to obtain some populist rhetorics toward migration to attract some more voters. And of course, it's about the rhetorics, because on the other hand, he wants to stay in Europe and have a strong voice there. So it's, for me, more about pragmatism than conservative approach.
Yeah, I'm so glad you mentioned that, because that sounds very familiar. And I think that, so we have those two different parties within the Netherlands, the progressive and the conservative liberals. And I think overall we tend to agree both that migration is a permanent reality, we have to deal with it. But in the rhetorics, it's very different. In the rhetorics, the conservative liberals are much more taking a bit of the populist line, like resisting migration, we have to limit it, and we have to indeed be careful that not too many people come in. And the progressive line is more like, well, migration is a reality, let's deal with it. So that's, I think the rhetorics is an important one, but I think it's a dangerous one, because what we see is that the public, the voters, they get these two different images from liberal parties, and then the politics ends up being quite similar. Now that, I think, is very dangerous, because that's when voters start to think, hey, what have we been told here? What is actually happening? Is this what promises have been made and what are being fulfilled? So I think, yeah, the danger of rhetorics is definitely around the corner then.
Last question before we open the floor for questions. So if you have questions, if you are interested in something you want to ask our distinguished panelists, please think about it, because then they will be in a position to answer. In the chapter relative to the Netherlands, there was a little sentence about the ambivalency of the Workers' Party, the PvdA. And you mentioned that this party has a very important Muslim voter base, that's why they are ambivalent. We see the same thing in France with the Socialist Party and the radical left of Jean-Luc Mélenchon. My question is, because we are talking about also a conservative stereotype that left-wingers cannot address this problem because they want the votes of Muslims, they support migration because they want the votes of Muslims. In Germany and the Netherlands, because I suppose these are the two countries where there is a considerable mass of Muslim voters, is it an argument that you feel comfortable to make, or is it an argument that's half true or it's not true at all? What's your point on that? I think we should start with the Netherlands, because you made that point anyway. So.
Yeah. And I think I lost my microphone. To see if this one works. Yeah. So, yeah. Good. It works. Yeah, indeed. So that point is made in our article, and it's made as one of the explanations. Of course, we're trying to find out like what happened here during the election campaigns with the traditional left party, the Labour Party, and I think yes, it was part of their struggle, because it doesn't only have to do with the voters base. It's just that for the past decades, Labour has been quite positive about the multicultural society. Some major figureheads of the Labour Party have been, you know, very vocal about that, and partly indeed to have that support from the immigrants. But I think not only because of that, I think it fitted with their whole discourse and their ideology. But they got into trouble when they noticed, well, another part of our voters base is very concerned about migration and wants to limit migration. So that's where they started to have this very ambiguous language. And so I think it's not only to soothe the Muslim voters. I think it's a broader story than that. But it's part of the story, I think. Yeah.
Yeah, Germany, I think it depends on which Muslim voters you want to focus. I'd say it's half true, because the Social Democrats are the party which is mostly voted by the Muslim community in Germany. It's the Turkish voters, it's the Arab voters who usually go for Social Democrats. The Jewish voters go for the Christian Democrats. On the other hand, we have the Alawite community, for example, and the Alawite community is quite close to the Christian Democrats again. The Kurdic people from Kurdistan are usually close to the left party. So it really depends which kind of Muslim you want to define. What is a Muslim? Is an Alawite a Muslim for you? What about the left-wing Kurdish people, the PKK, fighting for independence in Turkey? It's an issue that is mostly put as a topic by the left party in Germany. And on the other hand, of course, the SPD attracts migrants, that's true. The Greens attract migrants, but they also attract migrants from Spain, for example, from Italy, for example. So it's not only the Muslim vote they have to care for. I'd say it's half a true, yeah. So the SPD has a problem. They cannot attract the topic as they probably should do, I'd say, because they have to respect their voter base. And this voter base is mainly conservative, nationalist Turkish. You can see it now that Mr. Erdogan, when he comes to Germany, he goes to the hotspots where the SPD usually is quite strong. So those Turkish voters tend to vote for the AKP in Turkey and the SPD in Germany. We don't know how to deal with that, actually. And so it's a very tricky problem for the SPD.
So, thank you very much. You want to make another? Okay. How do you want to do it? Are we going to collect several questions and then answer? Okay. So now the floor is yours. If you have questions or points to make, please do so now. I think we heard 3 or 4 very interesting presentations and very important presentations. So.
My question has to do with the lady from the Netherlands. You mentioned a kind of very interesting characterization of the party system in the Netherlands. So we heard about left parties, but no right party. We heard about liberal parties, progressive liberal, progressive, the Greens are progressive leftists. There was also a liberal conservative party. These are official characterizations, or it's your characterizations of the party system? And what these differences mean?
Maybe I'll just respond to that quickly, because that's a very direct question to me on the Dutch political landscape. Yeah, so there are. This is the debate at the moment. So these categories are around. It's not that I just made them up by myself completely, but I have worked with them creatively. Especially when it comes to progressive liberal, conservative liberal, these terms are floating around, but it's a bit difficult because in Dutch we use those terms differently. So D66, for example, calls itself sociaal-liberaal, social liberal, but that doesn't translate very well. But the term progressive in Dutch, progressief, is definitely used for both the Greens and D66. So yes, that is an official term that is being used. Conservative, we use a different term for that, but it comes close to it. It's definitely being used for parties like VVD and Christian Democrats, and the term right-wing is still being used, but it's become, I didn't put it in my presentation because it has become so fragmented that it almost, it doesn't really cover the differences between the parties. Very brief example, Geert Wilders is often considered a right-wing party, just like the VVD. So I called Geert Wilders populist right, but right-wing doesn't really cover it for him because at the same time he has very left-wing socioeconomic politics, as I mentioned in my presentation. So that's why this is such a debate at the moment that it's just, these terms are floating around, but we haven't actually been able to decide which party is really what. And I have another graph that's in the booklet that you can see where the parties are on these different lines. And that's, I would recommend you to look at the article, because that graph, I think that's the most official designation of where the parties are in the landscape.
Yeah, it was interesting that the center-left and center-right was omitted. Also,
sorry,
center left and center right
yeah.
was omitted from your categories.
Yeah.
And also, I have the feeling that in the general European narrative, left means more or less extreme left, and right means more or less extreme right. Center left and center right mean the traditional left, the social democrat, and the conservative CSU, CDU, and so on. So that was a little bit problematic for me, the character.
Yeah, well, maybe we should talk about this afterwards, because this is a long discussion. But I agree with the confusion. It is confusing.
You are going to have the possibility, by the way. Any other questions? Hola. If not, I would like to thank our panelists for your presentations and for this discussion. If somebody has a question left in themselves that you didn't want to or you didn't dare to ask here in public, now you are going to have the possibility to do it in private. I think all our panelists agree. We have a little reception for you back on the left side of this cafe. We would like to welcome you for this little reception, and thank you for coming, thank you for participating, and thank you again to all of our participants. Thank you.